Okay, hey everybody, welcome to chapter one. This is history of 1450. We are going to cover chapter one, look at the Americas and Europe and Africa before Columbus shows up, or right about the time Columbus shows up, before 1492. Okay, so when we're looking at this, story of these three continents, right? We're looking at these three areas. We're looking at Africa, we're looking at Europe, and we're looking at the Americas, North and South America, and the Caribbean. And we're looking at multiple cultures that are going to come together through this exploration of the Europeans, right? We're going to have Native American cultures in North America, South America, Latin America. We're going to have European cultures, and we're going to have African cultures that are all going to be significantly changed due to this contact that we're going to have between these cultures. And so that's what we're looking at here. To begin with, let's look at what prompted Europe to go looking across the Atlantic Ocean. I know in grade school, and we talked about Columbus, the idea is that the majority of the world thought that people thought the world was flat, and that's not true. By the time of Columbus, most of the educated world, even going all the way back to the Greeks, most of the educated world thought the world was a globe. It was round. However, the scholars were relatively unsure about the actual size of the Earth, and the fear was that there wasn't going to be the technology wasn't there to sail westward across the Atlantic Ocean and reach Asia, and there really wasn't necessarily a need to, because before 1452, there's this land trade that's going to go between Asia and Europe and North Africa, right? And this trade is really going to increase dramatically following the Crusades. And the first Crusade is going to happen in 1095, right? The Crusades, ultimately, for our purposes, are going to be this. There's the Holy Land of Jerusalem and Israel, and where Jesus did his missionary work. And eventually, this is going to, it's going to be controlled by the Romans during Christ's time. After that, through, I don't know, 300 or 400 CE, the Romans and then the Byzantines are going to control it. But by the 900s, 1000s, that area has fallen under the influence of Islamic rulers, right? And so one of the Islamic rulers decides that, hey, we don't want these European Christians coming in to pilgrimage and to visit. And so the Pope is upset by this, this slight. And so he gets together and he encourages some of the medieval kings to form an army and send them into the Holy Land and try to recapture these lands that are ruled by the Muslims. And so for, I don't know, almost 300 years or so, 200 years, we have this series of crusades that are going to, go into the Holy Land and fight Muslim leaders, right? What we're going to see, though, is each time one of these armies goes to Jerusalem, they're going to interact with Islamic culture. They're going to interact with Northern African culture. They're going to interact with a different level of Asian culture or Asian influence that is present in those areas. And so they're going to bring that back with them throughout all these different crusades. Not all of them end up in the Holy Land. The first one's successful. The second and third ones aren't. The fourth crusade actually ends up battling the Byzantines and Constantinople, and it's a huge mess. But what the crusades ultimately do is they increase the amount of trade that's happening between Europe and Asia through the Middle East, right? Then somewhere around 1476. I'm sorry. So around the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476, the Catholic Church is going to be the only large-scale institution in Europe, right? And so it's going to control not only like your souls, like the church stuff on Sunday. It's also going to control how kings interact with the peasants and how peasants owe allegiance to kings and so forth and so on. So they're going to be in charge of this social order. And so most of the focus during this Middle Ages from roughly 500 to, we'll say, 1500, right? Is going to focus on preparing for life after death. We're trying to ready the soul for death, and ultimately, life is very hard in Europe. There's not too many towns that survive. There's some towns in Italy that kick around because of trade, and those are going to be the towns that those are going to be the city states that we see the Renaissance take off in. But for the most part, Europe is it's a feudal system where you have a king on the top telling everybody what to do, and the peasants are just trying to grow enough food and not catch a weird disease and die. And that's really what life is like during that time frame. It's not too pleasant, right? We talked about the feudal system, which is this we're going to call it a mutually supportive system in which the king provides land for the peasants, and the peasants are going to provide food and military arms for the king when needed. So the king's going to provide protection and land, and the peasants are going to provide labor, right? It sounds like a good deal, I suppose. However, the peasants are going to be horribly mistreated. They're going to, you know, have no rights. Serfs are a step above slaves in the fact that they can't be sold as a person, but yet, if land changes hands, the serfs stay with the land, right? And so life is pretty rough for the peasants of Middle Ages Europe. And then somewhere around the 1300s, 1350, 1340, right, the bubonic plague is going to arrive in Europe. And there's going to be multiple waves of the plague that are going to come through. And the plague is going to stick around well into the mid 1600s. But the big part of the plague is going to be this Black Death that's going to come around about 1350, and there's different estimates. Some you'll read somewhere that somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 of the European population is going to die. Other places you'll see smaller numbers. And I think what you're seeing there is just the plague's going to hit different areas with different intensities. But overall, what our takeaway for this class right here is the fact that when the bubonic plague hits Europe, a large portion of the population is going to die. And so therefore, that's going to change the relationship between the kings and the serfs, or the kings and the peasants, the nobility and the peasants. Before the peasants were kind of before the peasants were disposable. They really weren't that important, right? If you kick one off the land, there's going to be another one to take its place. The problem is if all of a sudden you lose 2/3 of those populations, well, they're going to demand a little bit better treatment. If you think back to COVID in 2020, when everybody got laid off, and then all of a sudden we reopen everything, and nobody wants to go back to work for what they were working for before, and so they're demanding higher wages, and restaurants begin to pay better. The same thing is going to happen on a much larger scale. COVID is very, very small compared to what we're looking at with the bubonic plague and the Black Death. But those that survive are going to find new wealth and privileges because their labor is much more important. It's much more valued at this point, and so they have, they have some bargaining chips. Not only that, but their labor is going to their labor is going to be less because there's less people to feed, and so now all of a sudden people have additional free time. And so when you have additional free time and people begin to explore different ideas, and they're going to explore, they're going to explore the ideas of the past. They're going to go back to the teachings of the Romans. They're going to go back to the teachings of the Greeks. And where do those teachings typically come from, or how are they reintroduced into European society? Well, one of the ways is through those crusades. Those crusaders are going to go over because the works of Virgil and Aristotle and Plato, those are works that are kicking around the Middle East, and they've been there this whole time, and they haven't been really stuffed away. When the Catholic Church takes over, they kind of put those ideas to the side, and they focus mostly on sacred works like the Bible, right? And so many people are going to see this new rebirth, or this birth of culture, or this at least asking questions about what life was like in the past. And what we're going to see a return to is this idea of humanism, which the Greeks and the Romans really celebrated, that kind of gets swept under the rug during the Middle Ages when the church controls everything. And so this idea of personal pride, to go out and make a name for yourself. And the goal is no longer just to be, prepared for the afterlife, but also, to kind of enjoy your life and show, there's value in the human experience. The painting there, of course, is of Mona Lisa, probably one of the most famous paintings of the Renaissance done by Leonardo da Vinci. Um, and you wouldn't have seen that piece of artwork done in the Middle Ages because it puts too much importance on the individual. Mona Lisa, who was actually one of the wives of the Medici's, and it puts too much importance on the role of the artist. And so both of those things would have been considered sinful before the Renaissance, because you're taking too much pride in your work. Anyway, this is the backdrop. This reemergence of humanism and of importance on the individual. This is the backdrop that's going to come about that's going to lead to this change, and the willingness to explore and to look for new ways to develop new wealth. And that's the powder, and then the spark that's going to light it off happens in 1453, when the Turkish forces in modern day Turkey conquer the Byzantine capital of Constantinople. So in 1453, Constantinople is going to fall to the Turks, who are Islamic. They're Muslims. They practice the faith of Islam, and Christian Europe begins to become really, really concerned with this fact. So 1453, they were getting all their goods from Asia, and they're coming through Constantinople. And yeah, you're paying some taxes there, but you're paying taxes to the Byzantines that are, it's a different type of Christianity. They're Orthodox Christians, and most of Europe, all of Europe, basically at this point is Catholic. And so you're seeing different looks, but like it's going to be different religions, but it's still all the same God. And then all of a sudden, bam, you have Islam show up, and although you could argue that it's the same God there, it's a different religion. And so the kings and queens of Europe begin to look for alternative ways to find the spices and the goods that they were getting from Asia, right? And Portugal, this teeny tiny little country right here on the Atlantic side of Spain, is the first of the European countries that are going to find a new route to Asia that allows them to bring in goods. Portugal is going to set up an extensive trading network along the west coast of Africa. They're going to colonize a couple of what's going to be referred to as the Sugar Islands or the Canary Islands off the west coast of Africa, and they're going to get. Eventually, one of their sailors is going to get blown off course down here at the Cape of Good Hope, and all of a sudden, India opens up to Portugal, and Portugal is going to make a ton of money. Just about that same time, here we go, 1491, Da Gama is going to sail around Africa to India, and he's going to establish trading routes. And so all these little dots up here, little bits of red, these are areas that are going to be controlled by Portugal, and it's going to bring in tons and tons and tons of money. And so while that's going on, you have Spain, which is right next door. And in 1469, King Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile marry, and they bring together the two most powerful families in Spain, and they unify. They work together to basically re-Christianize Spain. They expel most of the Islamic the Muslims from Spain. They kick out almost all the Jews from Spain between 1469 and 1500. And so they create this, quote unquote Christian country, right? This Catholic country. And that's going to play a pretty important role in this agreement to take Christopher Columbus and give him a couple boats and send him off. And so in 1492, we have this Italian sailor, Christopher Columbus, that's been shopping around this idea of going to Asia by heading west. And he's gone basically everywhere. He's gone to, some of the city states in Italy. He's gone to France. He's gone to England. Nobody's given him really the time of day. And he goes to Spain and he pitches this idea. He pitches this idea to Ferdinand that, hey, if we can find a direct route to India, that we're going to make lots of money in trade. And he goes to Isabella, Queen Isabella, and he pitches this idea that, hey, there's all these unsaved souls in India and in Asia, and couldn't we take Christianity to them? And so he strikes whatever chord he needs to, and Spain gives him 3 boats, which is really pretty cheap, to be honest. And Columbus sails west. He stops at the Canary Islands and heads west. The biggest problem for Columbus is that he just drastically underestimates the size of the globe, and he's very fortunate that he hits that he hits the New World when he does, because he just didn't bring enough supplies to get around, right? And so Columbus sails across. He lands in the Caribbean, picks up some stuff, and sails back home, right? Lands in San Salvador. Believes that he's found India, right? And he heads back to Spain, tells them, hey, we're so lucky we found this, blah, 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 blah. And that's where we're going to leave the Europeans at this point. So Columbus has contacted the New World, and he believes that he's found India. So when Columbus finds the New World, or bumps into the New World, or whatever, he's going to find a landmass, or a group of people, or a culture of people that have been around for thousands of years. And so where do these folks come from? There's lots of different ideas about where the people from the Americas come from. The one we're going to use in this class is that they're going to cross over the Bering Land Bridge, right? So in between Alaska and Russia, there is a land bridge. There's land underneath the ocean that was accessible to our ancient ancestors somewhere between 9 to 15,000 years ago, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And there's a huge ice age, right? And so most of northern Canada and Russia and Alaska are frozen solid, and the oceans are frozen solid. And so we believe that people are going to migrate. When I say frozen solid, I'm a little bit that's probably misleading. The sea levels are low enough that because of the freezing of the Arctic, that the land bridge is exposed, and so there's vegetation there. It's not like these people are walking across an ice bridge. It's actually a land bridge, and so they're walking across this area. They're following large game. Probably they're hunting along the way. They're settling. Some people are going to settle in modern day Alaska. Some people are going to move on a little bit further, and it's estimated that these groups of people move somewhere between, I don't know, 15 to 20 miles a year, and just follow the herds down the west coast of America. Okay, at some point, the glaciers melt, and it causes the land bridge to be underneath the sea. It's believed that somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 4 miles of the west coastline was available to these early travelers. And so one of the reasons that some of the archaeological evidence is so sparse is that coastline should be about anywhere between a mile to 2 out to sea, which is pretty dramatic, right? And so we have that, and for our purposes, that's all we need to know. People are moving southward along the west coast of America. The first place that we're going to see large scale culture is going to be in Mesoamerica. This is going to be right below Mexico, in modern day Belize and Honduras and Guatemala. And one of the reasons for this is that if we look at this map here, which is kind of bad, I don't know if I have any other good maps. I don't think it looks like I do. You look at the West Coast, and obviously there's a mountain range there, but there's a lot of land. And if there's a lot of land, I don't have to live all that close to my neighbors. And if I don't have to live all that close to my neighbors, I don't have to talk to them. If I don't have to talk to them, I don't have to interact with them. But as we get further and further south, you can see right here on this Isthmus of Mexico, in Latin America, that landmass is going to shrink up, right? It gets a lot smaller. And so when that happens, you have people living closer together. And when you live closer to someone, you have to interact with them. And when you interact with them, eventually culture begins to take form. And so we're going to see the home of we're going to see the Olmec, the Mayan, and the Aztec cultures really kind of gain a foothold here in Mesoamerica. The very first one is going to be Olmec. We believe somewhere between 1200 and 400 BCE. So, roughly about maybe the time of a little bit before the Greeks, before the Bronze Age, the Olmec are going to be around. They're going to settle on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, mostly modern day Belize and those areas. They're going to build aqueducts. They're going to have irrigation. They're going to have a written language. They're going to grow things. They're going to have I don't know. They're going to have an agricultural society where they're going to grow maize and squash and beans and tomatoes, and they're going to hunt. But those large animals that our ancestors followed across the Bering Land Bridge, well, they die off as that ice age comes to an end, and that the glaciers and melt and the sea levels come back up. The mammoths and the larger animals that those people had followed across the bridge die off, and so now the Olmec society is based mainly on agriculture, and then they're going to they're going to fish. Obviously, they're right there by the ocean, and they're also going to breed small dogs, which sounds kind of foreign to us in a modern society, but they're going to eat small dogs as a form of protein. Okay, so then there's the Olmec. The Mayan Empire is going to follow the Olmec Empire somewhere between 2000 BCE all the way up until 900 CE. Again, same areas. They're going to build. They're going to build on top of each other in lots of different ways. The Mayans are going to have a written language. They're going to have a high level of mathematical understanding. In fact, they're the first culture to come up with the idea of zero, the value of zero, right? They have calendars, all that fun stuff. It's believed somewhere around 900 that there's a century-long drought on the planet, and that's going to cause. Oh, there is a century-long drought. Like we have evidence of that in Europe, but that's going to cause the Mayan culture to fall apart. The little bit of Mayan culture that's still going to be around by the 1520s is stamped out by the Spanish relatively quickly. The Spanish are going to see the Mayan writings of the Codex, which we're looking at there, as being demonic, and they round all these things up and they burn them. If you can stumble across, I don't know where you would stumble across original Codex books, but if you do, they're worth a ton of money. So 900, the Mayans typically they go away, they vanish, and then somewhere around 1300 till about the 1500s, the Aztecs are going to control most of Central America during that time frame. Right, they're going to live in modern day Mexico City. They're going to be a warrior type society. They're going to have large scale cities like Tenochtitlan, which is modern day Mexico City. When the Europeans first show up, it's believed that that Tenochtitlan is about 200,000 people, which makes it one of, if not the largest cities in the world at that point. It's larger than anything in Europe. It's much larger than London or Madrid at that point, right? The Aztecs have a different quality of life. They bathe daily. They have aqueducts that ship in fresh water. They farm. They have all those types of things. The big negative about the Aztecs is they practice daily human sacrifice. And so they're going to be very, very, very unpopular with their neighbors, um, seen as savages by the Europeans. I mean, you can make arguments for being savages both ways, and this idea of human sacrifice doesn't really play into the Aztecs' favor, but we have that. In Latin America, we have the Incas, who are going to be the most advanced society, and we will chat about them a little bit later. But they have a huge system of roads that connect their empires. Um, they don't have a written language, but they do have a form of communication that's written down in knots, and so they would tie knots to communicate things like harvest yields and those types of ideas. Okay. The Incas live in the Andes Mountains, and so it's very mountainous. They have trusses that allow them to create land to farm, and they're going to grow most of the similar. They're going to grow similar things to the Mesoamericans. They're going to grow corn. That's going to be the staple of their diet. Farmers are going to get to keep about a third of what they grow. The rulers are going to take about a third of it, and then they're going to set aside a third for basically welfare, right? So we have those types of ideas. There's Manchu Picchu, which was discovered in the early 1900s, which is believed to be a resort city for the rulers of the Inca Empire. And then in North America, let's just chat about them real quick. And actually, you know what? This is getting to be a pretty long video. Let's end right there with the Incas, and I'll come back and hit you with North America and Africa in the second half. So, all right, stay tuned.